Today we will be talking about the daily life within Greece and Rome. First, we will be talking about Athenian daily life. Ancient Athenian daily life was fairly structured. There were different classes of Athenians. The lowest class was comprised of thetas, which were urban craftsmen. Those who were part of the middle ranks were small farmers, and those living at the top were aristocrats that owned large estates. Many occupations fell within these classes. Another class of citizens were the metics, who were free non-citizens that came from other city-states. There were also slaves, and even amongst the slaves there was a hierarchy. The highest level of slaves worked as tutors and police officials, while the middle level worked as domestic slaves and were often considered part of the family. The lowest level of slaves were mine workers. Women were also treated like domestic slaves and had very few rights. The roles of men and women greatly differed. The men ran the government and spent a lot of time outside of the house overseeing crops, sailing, hunting, and trading. They enjoyed wrestling, horseback riding, and of course, the Olympic Games. Women, however, stayed in the house and had little freedom. Their jobs were to take care of the house and children and to bear offspring for the family. They were supervised slaves who did all the cooking, cleaning, and tending of the crops. Girls didn't go to school and learned only basic math and reading, and how to tend to the home. Regarding food, the Greeks ate 3 meals each day. With irrigation and crop rotation, they were able to raise some crops, including wheat and barley, which allowed them to make a large variety of breads. They also grew olives, obviously, grapes and figs, and raised peas, navy beans, and lentils in their gardens. Meat was rarely eaten and was typically only used for religious sacrifice. Instead, milk, cheese, fish, and seafood were staple parts of the Greek diet.
As for daily life for Romans, the main social unit was the family. The males took on the head for these families as they held all of the power. Despite this, the power of the women was not limited. As for working standards, women were typically seen inside rather than outside because their main domain was within the house where they would cook, clean, and take care of children. A big concept for the Romans was having a half work and half leisure-filled day. Romans would work approximately 6 hours per day and then head off out from the Forum to go to the Colosseum, theater, or the baths. Although one may expect that these activities of leisure would be limited to the wealthy, people in the lower class were also able to enjoy these acts of entertainment. Because of this, the city remained a mixture of wealth and poverty, which can be most easily seen within the city center. The disparity between the wealthy and the poor can mainly be seen by the other types of luxuries, rather than the areas of the public, like slaves, heated baths, better education, and better housing. The knowledge we have about ancient Roman food is based off of what we have gathered from texts, wall paintings, mosaics, and even from remains of foods from Pompeii. Ancient Roman diet revolved around 4 main staples: cereals, vegetables, olive oil, and wine. Cereals made up the bulk of people's diets, and wheat and barley were the most commonly used. Oats, rye, and millets were also available. The most common fruits and vegetables were apples, figs, and grapes, and commonly used vegetables were beans, lentils, and peas. Meat was an expensive commodity, with poultry, a variety of birds, and wild game being an important source of food. Fish was also incorporated into the Roman diet, and most of which are still found in the Mediterranean today.
The Athenian agora was a pretty large part of Athenian daily life. Agora literally means gathering place, and that is exactly what it was to the Athenians. It was a large public area, a place for all to meet up and fraternize with the rest of the community. It was built in Athens between 600 and 150 BCE, making the architectural time period that it was built in ranging from archaic to Hellenistic. The agora was also a place where people could discuss all kinds of topics, like business, politics, current events, or the nature of the universe and the divine. It was located right below the Acropolis, and the architectural layout was centered around the Pan-Athenaic Way, which is a road that ran through the heart of Athens to the Diplyon, which is the main gate of the city. The road was sacred because it was the path that the Pan-Athenaic procession would take, which was a tradition that occurred every 4 years to honor Athena, the city's patron goddess. The procession would make its way up to the Parthenon, where they would change the garb of the Athena Parthenos. Within the agora was a complex of buildings dedicated to different things, like barbershops, bathhouses, perfume vendors, drinking establishments, and brothels. One of the more important buildings was the gymnasia. The Greeks were obsessed with humanity and wanted the ideal body. They spent portions of their days working out, wrestling, boxing, javelin, and discus throwing. Before and after their workouts, they typically lathered themselves in olive oil to get that glistening glow. Arguably, the most important feature of the agora was the stoa of Attalus II. The stoa was a gift given to the Athenians by the king of Pergamon, who was Attalus II, since he had spent his youth educating himself there, and it later became a shopping place. The stoa is 2 stories with 21 shops opening onto the colonnade. The first floor has Doric columns with rounded capitals, and the second features Ionic columns with volutes as capitals. The shaft of every third Doric column is unfluted to guard against damage from the constant flow of traffic at the time. The stoa is made of marble and limestone and features a shaded walkway so that Athenians could stay and rest from the blistering Mediterranean heat. The southwest area of the agora was dedicated to politics. One of the main political buildings featured in the agora is the Boletarian, which was the meeting place for the 500-member Senate. Athens was the birthplace of democracy, and Athenians took politics and social structures very seriously. They devised their own political system based on the collective rather than the individual. For example, they housed members of a senate instead of kings and queens. The Tholos was dedicated to the 50 executives of the 500 members of the Senate. Of these 50, there would be 10 to 15 people that would reside there 24/7, so that they would be ready to address any problem immediately.
As for the Forum of Trajan, it was essentially a public urban square for civil and ritual business. It was designed by Apollodorus of Damascus, and it was made to honor Trajan, the highly respected ruler who followed the terrible ruler Domitian. The Basilica Oppia was a large part of the Forum of Trajan. It was named after Emperor Trajan's family name, Oppius. It was the largest basilica in Rome until the creation of St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City. It was a place for the common person to go and served as a public place for business and also courts of law. It was a place for Romans to fraternize, trade, bank, and judge. It was unique in its architectural style, which was influenced by Egyptian hypostyle halls and would influence other buildings later on. The Basilica Oppia was a major part of the Forum of Trajan, which overall had a massive psychological effect on the average city dweller due to its gleaming open space and general extravagance. Trajan's market was built between 100 to 110 CE by Apollodorus of Damascus. The function of the markets were mainly commercial, where the markets may have been designed to relocate shops and different offices that were displayed by the Trajanic building project. The most famous market interior was the main hall, which was the main shopping area for spices, clothes, and food. The interior had arches that created 2 floors, known as the clerestory feature. On the first floor, there were shop entrances that were street vendor-like, so they were opened up. The apartments and offices above first level consisted of a variety of businesses where the government of Rome ran a social program called the wheat dole. Basically, they would collect wheat and sell it to poor Romans at a reduced fixed price all year round. The Roman Emperor Nero was the last of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. He was greatly disliked by his people because of his vanity and inadequacies as a leader. He was very cruel, which can be seen by his acts of executing his 2 wives. During his reign, there was a great fire that impacted much of Rome that left large sections of the city destroyed. Rather than reconstructing the city, selfish Nero only constructed new buildings for himself and his own use. He eventually came to an end when he was forced to commit suicide prior to being kicked off of the throne. When Vespasian Flavius came to rule in 69 CE, he decided to build public works on some of Nero's constructions.
On the site of Nero's Domus Aurea, which had been a great palace with an artificial lake, Flavius built the Flavian Amphitheater, which many of us know now as the Colosseum. It was nicknamed after a colossal statue of Nero that stood nearby. The Colosseum is an imperial Roman building and was built under the rulers Vespasian, Titus, and Domitian. It was made of stone and concrete, which was a new medium at the time that Romans used quite frequently in their architecture. The Colosseum was commissioned around AD 70 to 72, and it was considered a gift to the Roman people. Initially, the Flavian Amphitheater consisted of 100 days of games, including gladiatorial combats and wild animal fights. Even though 2/3 of the Colosseum had been destroyed over time, the amphitheater remains a popular tourist destination. Alright, so enough of the background. We are going to start talking about the daily life at the Colosseum. So, games hosted at the Colosseum were attended by all levels of society. Lower level seats were occupied by the higher class, who would wear more vibrant colors, while the higher level seats were occupied by the lower class, who would wear more dull colors. Events lasted all day and were quite brutal forms of entertainment for the public to watch. Some of these events included public executions, fights between wild animals, or fights between wild animals and humans, and even recreations of sea battles. One of the more well-known events hosted at the Colosseum in ancient Rome, the gladiatorial fights, were brutal man versus man sword fights. Gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, and criminals that were forced to train in combat. Usually, their end goal of a fight would be freedom, but it would often result in death.
The following quote really demonstrates the brutality that occurred in the Colosseum. This quote is from a letter from the time that the Colosseum was active. Then men were thrown to lions and to bears, but at midday to the audience. There was no escape for them. The slayer was kept fighting until he could be slain. "Kill him! Flog him! Burn him alive!" was the cry. "Why is he such a coward? Why won't he rush on the steel? Why does he fall so meekly? Why won't he die willingly?" Through this quote, we can see the ancient Romans' fascination with gore and violence and how it correlated with the Colosseum.
Initially, violence was favored by the Romans because the emperors believed that it would be a good way to keep the citizens happy and prevent uprisings. Eventually, with the rise of Christianity and Christian influences, this intrigue with violence and brutality began to lose appeal, and more people began developing morals of nonviolence. As a result, the Colosseum was no longer used as much. Even by this time, the Colosseum had experienced damage due to weather. In the next few centuries, it was abandoned, and it was actually used as a quarry for other building projects, like the cathedrals of St. Peter and St. John Lateran.
A pattern that we noticed within the daily lives of Greeks and Romans was that they always had a common area where everyone could gather and socialize. This helped us to see the ways of their culture and the ways in which they interacted with one another. It also demonstrates how things have changed, as well as stayed the same from the past. Thank you for watching.